Welcome to Your Digital Reputation. Here's your host, Roger Christie.
Hello and thanks for joining us. My name is Roger Christie, founder of social media advisory firm Propel and host of the Your Digital Reputation podcast, where we talk to industry leaders about how they get social media right in the moments that matter most. One of the moments we'll all face in our lives, often many times, is decisions that ultimately shape our career path. Whether we use social media to help us realise our full professional potential, or whether we choose instead to play it safe. And I'm not just talking about fame and fortune here, much more than this. It's about whether we're intentional with social media to ensure those professional opportunities we're given create a legacy defined by purpose, impact, and possibilities for future generations. This is essentially the journey Assistant Commissioner at the Australian Taxation Office, Tim Loh, is going on. A journey that, according to his great newsletter, 3 Thursday Tidbits, saw him go from a 15-year career as a lawyer to speaking to millions of people on live television, radio and podcasts overnight. And it's the specific role his social media efforts played in that journey and the benefits it's presented that I'm keen to unpack with him today. Tim, thank you so much for joining me on the Your Digital Reputation podcast.
Hey, Roger. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm really looking forward to this, and I want to, because I know you've got such a great story to tell, and I know from the chats that we've had over many years now, as we've talked about before, it's great that we're finally here having this chat. I know you've got so much to share, and so much to share to people who I think may have doubts and may have questions and may not see their current positioning and their current kind of image or presence online as something that they can build on. Because you have this unusual path. And so maybe let's go back before we come forward. And let's start by giving our listeners a sense of, learning a little bit more about you and your career journey to date. Where did this all start? So where did this all start for you, and particularly up to that moment where you stepped more purposefully into the public spotlight?
Look, I might start off back in Deloitte in 2004, which is where I started off as a graduate. I worked there for a couple of years and really learnt a lot about tax, which is where the area I was working in. And after a couple of years, I had the opportunity to work for a year in Toronto, Canada, in their international tax division. So I did that for about a year. Got a bit of homesickness due to the cold in Toronto compared to the hot weather in Perth. And luckily enough, got a job at Baker & McKenzie, which is a law firm, international law firm in Melbourne. And I spent nearly 2 years there before my partner there. He changed law firms to work at what was called Blake Dawson at the time, and then was renamed Ashurst. And I spent about 3.5 years there. And that was a great experience working for a law firm. And an opportunity came up to do a secondment at BHP, and I took that secondment opportunity. And the people at the time, the management at the time, said, "Look, Tim, why don't you come across permanently?" So I did that and worked there for about 3.5 years, and learned so much about how large corporate works, especially a company with the prestige of BHP. And there was an opportunity at the ATO, and that opportunity was in an area called Tax Counsel Network, which is effectively the in-house legal area for the ATO. Did the interview there and got a role in the ATO, and that was back in 2017, and I'm still at the ATO today.
And so I love that you explained this legal journey that you've gone on and the different roles that you've had, not necessarily known as a traditional pathway to the public spotlight and that kind of visibility that you have, and that I shared in the intro, that idea that you went from being a lawyer to speaking to millions of people overnight. So what changed after that 15-year career, and why did it change?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Roger. For me, it was effectively trying to conquer my fear. So I had this fear of public speaking, which I've been quite open about. And if I take you back, 3.5 years, I was having a chat with my boss at the time, Fiona Dillon. We were having a quiet drink on Hardware Lane in Melbourne, which is a famous strip for dining. And she was asking me about, do you want to do something different? Because we had been talking about it for about a 12-month period. And she mentioned that look, there's a job here. It's to be the spokesperson for the ATO, and you're going to have to be on TV and radio. And in my mind, I was thinking to myself, I had this fear of public speaking, as I said before. So I was thinking to myself, no, I don't think I can do that. But she said to me, well, why don't you speak to one of our colleagues who leads that area, who I would, who's a fantastic person, and ask her a bit more about the role. And she described to me, what the role was, and it wasn't just the spokesperson role. So you might see me, when I was doing that role, in the media all the time, but you actually have another kind of substantive role that you have to work through. And when she described those other aspects of the role, they were also quite daunting because I hadn't been involved in the ATO for many years. And so it was another part of the ATO that I kind of was interested in seeing. And so obviously I had that curiosity to wonder, whether, maybe I should do the role. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I've got this fear of public speaking, what if I can't do it? And so in the end, I decided, maybe because of COVID, I don't know, you take more risks. I decided to do that role of being the spokesperson. I had to effectively do a couple more interviews, with the second commissioner, Jeremy Hershon, and then the commissioner at the time, Chris Jordan, and to get the job. And eventually they said yes, and they gave me the role as the spokesperson. But, one of the reasons for doing it initially was I really wanted to conquer that fear of public speaking, and this was one way I was going to do it, and it was obviously jumping in right at the deep end of things. And
so you've talked about this, corporate journey that you've gone on in-house and in working in private firms. You've talked then about this transition, and I admire. I don't know how long you took to make that decision and work up the courage to basically conquer your fear head on, but you've then transitioned into this, what is essentially now a very public role, a spokesperson role, and I love that. And as I was saying before, I feel like it's a somewhat non-traditional, non-linear path. I reckon if you did a Venn diagram, Tim, and you looked at lawyers, public servants, and then added a third dimension here, people who are top voices on LinkedIn. It's a pretty small sample size, right? I don't imagine there's too many people. So let's bring that third overlaying lens here. Why did you take up the opportunity, within that context, why did you take up the opportunity on social media? What did that look like?
yeah, Roger, it was really about humanising the ATO. So when I took on the spokesperson role, I really wanted to showcase what we did at the ATO, and I really wanted to kind of give a bit of the behind the scenes aspects of my role as, transitioning, as you said before, from being a lawyer to a spokesperson. And I wanted to, showcase, what work I was doing, what the team was working on, to kind of share the messages we wanted to share with the Australian community around tax time. And also, as I said before, through those kind of aspects, humanise the ATO through that lens. And so I thought, why not use LinkedIn as a platform to do that? We obviously have a PR team and a media unit team, so they do a lot of the traditional media, but also some of the social media stuff that we do on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And I wanted to kind of add my voice to that and really share a bit about my journey from being a lawyer to a spokesperson. So that's how it kind of kicked off. And what I was really deliberate about was making sure that I was consistent with the posting. So I would probably post, let's say, once or twice a week around what I was doing, whether it's working with Bunnings on a collaboration, or whether it was working with Officeworks, or whether it was behind the scenes at the studio. I thought I'd share all that information with the people who were kind of following me at the time, just to give them some, tips about how I was going to go about it, and give them, I guess, the courage to pursue potentially, a career pivot if they wanted to, not necessarily in the media, but just kind of describing to them some of the thoughts that I was having about how I was making that career pivot. Because as you said before, it was literally overnight. One day you're being a lawyer, the next day you're the spokesperson. And so I really had to adjust to that period in quite a quick manner.
So I've got a couple of questions off the back of that, Tim. You're making me think about things here. The idea, firstly, of humanising. You said you wanted to humanise things. Why choose social media as a way to humanise the brand?
So for me, social media was, I felt, a platform that was growing. There's obviously, it is, massive now, but at the time I was thinking to myself that we normally only have mainstream media, TV, radio to talk, to kind of share some of our messages. And I really wanted to find a different avenue to connect with the audience. So if I kind of think about the taxpayer segment that I'm looking after, it's individuals. There's 10 million individuals who lodge tax returns every year. Some people watch mainstream media, so probably the older generation. Don't want to stereotype people, but the younger generation use social media a lot more. They don't watch Channel 7 and watch Channel 9. They watch YouTube, and they use Instagram. They use LinkedIn to a lesser extent. But I really wanted to test whether some of our messages could resonate with that younger, different generations on the various different platforms. And I thought social media was one avenue, and obviously LinkedIn was an avenue to kind of use that as a platform to test some of the messages that we're sending to the audience, and to see if it resonated. Because at the end of the day, at the ATO, we're really about trying to get people to do the right thing the first time. We can't audit everyone, but we really want people to do the right thing the first time. And we do have over 95% of people doing the right thing when it comes to their tax return. So from our perspective, or my perspective, it was really about using a different platform to see whether our messages would resonate with that population. And I found it did.
And so you talked about the success of that approach. What I'm interested in alongside that was you've given a couple of clues here that it is as much about the technical and the work message, or the mission that you're on within the ATO, but it sounds there was also a bit of a parallel stream. It sounds like there was also something you're sharing there about people who might have the same doubts, and people who might not see themselves as being able to contribute something in a public forum, and the journey that you've gone on in that way as well. So were you, as you're stepping into this new role, did you feel like you had dual responsibilities here? One was about humanising the organisation and, as you say, bringing a different voice and perspective to it. And also as someone who is essentially trying to learn and go on this journey themselves, and in doing so, inspiring others to consider how they could speak up and contribute.
Yeah, good question, Roger. I think at the time I was really focused on the role that I had at the ATO and trying to execute to the best of my ability, the tax spokesperson role, and obviously sharing those messages with the Australian community through LinkedIn and other social media platforms and mainstream media. So that was my original intent. And I think as it evolved over the year and 2 years and 3 years, I started to think more about what else I could share with this community, because they were very engaged with what I was saying. And so I really wanted to make sure that I was kind of leaning into my values. And one of those values for me is, you kind of said that in the intro, is serving the next generation to create a level playing field. So in my mind, as I was evolving in the role, I was thinking to myself, how can I kind of lean into the values that are really important to me in order to help that next generation? And so I thought, one aspect to that would be to not pivot completely, because I still had my role as the ATO spokesperson. I still want to share the messages that were important, but intertwine that with some of the key messages around leadership and personal growth, things that I was making mistakes in and things that I was trying to kind of improve on, and really share that with the followers or audience that I have on LinkedIn. And that really resonated with people. Much to my surprise, I thought people were just interested in the tax stuff, but they're actually interested in the more personal journey that I was going on. And as I said before, that career pivot that I was kind of undertaking. And then I'm kind of seeing that in real life, I guess.
So can I just, to help me understand this, and particularly for listeners as well, it sounds like there was almost a realisation as you were going through the motions, so to speak. Is this something that kind of dawned on you through your posting, your engaging, you're getting this sense of direct feedback from people that, as much as the technical tax spokesperson role was valuable and important, there was also this, again, parallel stream here of other conversations around leadership and things aligned to your values that you saw people were responding well to. How did that become a conscious decision for you to then go, well, maybe I need to lean into this, and it will serve both outcomes better by you being a little bit more, human, and being a bit more personal with what you were sharing and how you were sharing it?
Well, I think it was an evolution. It kind of just happened over time in a kind of over a number of years. So, when I kind of think about when I did the spokesperson role, that was in 2021. I was really focused on, getting our messages across and giving them the behind the scenes look around what I was doing and what the team was doing. And then in 2022, I was doing the same thing, but we were doing much more collaborations from a tax perspective. But I think it was in 2022 where it started to turn a little bit, in the sense that I was also posting a little bit more about how I was learning from the role and some of the mistakes I was learning or making, sorry, and some of the things I was learning from those mistakes. And I was a little bit vulnerable in that respect, and I shared that with on LinkedIn. And I think people really kind of were enamored by it, in the sense, because I guess when you see people, you always think they've got a facade and everything's perfect, especially on, things like Instagram and so forth, right? But I think the post that I posted on LinkedIn demonstrated to people that I'm not perfect, and most leaders aren't perfect, to be honest. No one's perfect. And so I think they really appreciated the fact that I was honest with them about some of the challenges that I was having in terms of pivoting from being a lawyer to a spokesperson. And I think they really, appreciated that, and wanted to kind of follow the journey that I was on. And so I made a bit of a deliberate pivot in 2023 to kind of lean more into posting about personal growth, some of the leadership challenges that I was having, and some of the things I was learning, continue to learn in the media landscape as well.
So what's interesting about that, Tim, and if I kind of step out and give the macro view at a moment, and you mentioned it before that, COVID may have given you the bravery, or certainly the kind of the impetus to make this decision and dive in back in 2021. COVID was also a catalyst for a number of changes around our behaviours and our preferences, broadly on social media. And so what we saw at a kind of macro global level was a shift away from brand communications to the introduction of individuals, and particularly leaders, as those who are often leading from the front and setting the example for their firms, and also those as the people who were the official ambassadors for their organisations. So we saw this shift away when there wasn't the town hall, when there wasn't the hallway chat, when there wasn't the water cooler chat. Those moments had gone. Everyone went, well, how do I still maintain that connection and communication with audiences? Suddenly platforms like LinkedIn become an awful lot more appealing and relevant. So there was this seismic shift in the way leaders use that channel between 2020 and 2022. And so exactly at the time when you're having this kind of engagement and experience and realization of, well, hang on, there's value to be gained here. And then the follow on of, well, there's value to be gained not only in just reaching the audience and communicating what we do as an organization, but also in forming a deeper connection. That's what, and being honest with the learnings and the mistakes and that sort of stuff. That's what the best leaders recognized. And it's still true today. Yet what's interesting, the amount of conversations I have where there is this perception that, well, no, everything needs to be perfect. Everything needs to be polished. Everything needs to be scripted. And that's what will lead to success on social media. It's an outdated approach. It's an outdated mindset that actually no longer holds true. The best opportunities, and I'm interested to explore this more with you, the best opportunities come from that more authentic, unscripted, purposeful style conversations that we have. Because if people want polished, they can go to a website. That's really simple. They can go to a media release, they can go and watch a TV ad, or they can see plenty of this in terms of digital display. So all this is polished, it is perfect. What people are looking for, and what COVID was a catalyst for, was actually getting behind the veil, getting behind the curtain, and understanding more about people and what makes them tick. Because that's the stuff that we were missing through that physical interperson connection. So it's interesting that your experience almost perfectly matches up with the timeline that all this was playing out. You're a living, breathing case study, if you didn't realise, Tim, an experiment.
No, that's right, Roger. That's well said. No, you're spot on. I think you just said it before. The key word is the authenticity. I think as leaders, that's what people are crying out for. They want to see authentic leaders, and you're quite right. If people wanted to see perfect, they could see it from a media release, or go to the website. Whereas what I think people were looking for was, as you said before, and I think this is what COVID took away from people in many respects, is that connection piece. And I think at the end of the day, as leaders and senior leaders of organisations, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, you've got to have that connectedness with your people. And I think demonstrating that authenticity is so important in making sure, as a leader, you're building the culture that you want with your people.
So one thing that I've observed, Tim, and I will bring in the newsletter here as an example too. When I look at, and having observed your social media activities for years and having subscribed to your newsletter for years now, it's a very different tone, and it's a very different themes and topics and ideas that you talk about today than what you first started sharing in 2021. And I'm interested because it sounds like someone had to twist your arm with a couple of drinks, as you were saying, to get you into that spokesperson role initially. And then likewise, it was then a bit of a transition to get to sharing more of that behind the curtain style stuff. How hard was it in those early days to step away from the security of the organisation and what it was talking about and what its mission was? And what were some of the hardest things in those early days, or perhaps your biggest fears as someone who, I know you've talked a lot about imposter syndrome and not necessarily feeling that the fear of public speaking even. What was the hardest things in those early days?
Look, I think the hardest things, Roger, was, everyone wants to be perfect or the best at something. And, if I'm thinking to myself, as a lawyer, I was pretty good at that game, right? Because I've been doing it for a while, right? But to be the spokesperson on day one and want to be the best spokesperson, I was never going to be that. I really looked at what other people who were really good at this space were doing, and what I found out when I was looking at other people's content was they weren't perfect either. So I think what I realized in the end was, yes, you can try and improve some of the things that make you a bit more, how can I say it, a bit more stronger in the way you communicate, and a bit more assertive in the way you communicated. But ultimately, at the end of the day, people wanted connection. They didn't want perfection. And I think that's what I realized over time. Yes, you want to improve and get better in the way you go about your craft, but you don't have to be perfect. But you have to connect with your audience. And I think that's what I came to realize over time, that connecting with the audience was the most important thing, not being perfect. And look, when I look back at all the interviews I did, I was never perfect. But what I was trying to do was make sure that I was connecting with the audience and really trying to understand who that audience was. Because when you're on different platforms, the audience is different. So I like to use this terminology, KYA, know your audience. You've got KYC in the financial areas around know your client. I think for me, what I really wanted to do was know my audience or know your audience. And I always try to use that as my light on the hill to understand what I was trying to communicate and making sure I was doing that.
So I'm interested in something that you shared in there, Tim, and that idea of connection. You've mentioned it a couple of times here. You took a more human approach, I'm guessing. Tell me if I'm wrong. You took a more human approach initially in your social media content to what you may have done in other mainstream media engagements. Did you find that connection you form with audiences and perhaps the direct feedback that you got through social media that isn't always possible in those other mediums, did you find that helped, one, give you confidence, and two, also then influence the way you turned up in other domains? Was that kind of that experience in social media and forming that connection, did that give you confidence to then be more human in other environments as well?
It's a good question, Roger. I'm just reflecting on that whilst you were asking that question. And to me, I think it was more around I think you're right in many respects. I think for me, it was about actions and doing them consistently and seeing the progress that you made. So I think an important aspect to confidence, in my opinion, is that you really have to be doing consistent actions. But most importantly, you also need to reflect on the things you have done. So everyone's always focusing on the gap and where are you trying to get to, right? But what I came to realize was I had to look at the things that I'd done and reflect on all the interviews I did or the posts I was doing and looking at where I'd come from day one to where I was now. And then also recognizing that you had made that progress. I think that's such an important thing that sometimes we're in the hustle and bustle of life. We just keep doing and trying to achieve. And we never stop to reflect on what we actually have done. And I think when I did that, it really helped with my confidence because I couldn't no longer say I'm crap at public speaking or I'm crap as a media spokesperson. If you've done 150 interviews, on, social media, mainstream media, podcasts, radio, and the like. You just can't say that anymore. That's not you anymore. And so another thing that I learned, that kind of helped improve my confidence is that your identity can change, and you can't keep saying the same beliefs to yourself because the facts didn't match up with that. That was a narrative you may have held since you were a kid or whatever, but that was no longer the narrative now because the data proves that that isn't the narrative now. So I think for me, reflection was really important, and also recognizing that the beliefs that I had held were no longer true.
I love that. I love the frame, the phrasing, get out of your own way. So often we do have that kind of very firmly held perceptions about ourselves and our capabilities. Get out of your own way and give it a crack. And I think your story does demonstrate that. You mentioned, like you've talked about reflection there. I want to mention another R word here around representation. And that's another thing that I think comes through your story for me. And I'd love to know a bit about that. You went from, as you said, general, if we're talking about the platform you had as an ATO spokesperson, general obscurity back in your corporate law days into where the public spotlight and the conversations with multiple media personalities that we all know, and household names. You've made this massive transition. What impact did that have on the people around you? And what did that do in terms of their perceptions of you and your notoriety, or particularly at family? How did they respond?
Oh, family, my wife and son didn't really care, to be honest. It was just normal, right? Because that for my son in particular, he was like kind of really 4 at the time. He's in kindy at the time. So for him, uh, it's kind of normal. And maybe I can take you back to a moment when he was in kindy, and I went to Sydney to the Today Show, in studio, and had the interview, and I came back late that night, and we had the media team with me, and they take photos and they'll send it to me, and which I could use for LinkedIn and other platforms and for their own purposes as well at the ATO. But I came back late, and my son was waiting for me, and I said to him I was at work, and he said, "Oh, what were you doing?" And I said to him, "Oh, I'll show you a photo of what I was doing today." And I showed him a photo of the studio with myself and David Campbell, I think, and Sylvia Jeffries, and it looked like we were talking. And he goes to me, "Well, you're hosting a TV show with your friends." And I just laughed, right? Because I was thinking to myself, when I was growing up, you wouldn't have seen people like myself on TV. That was just how it was, right? And I thought in that moment it was such a powerful reminder for me for what I was doing, because at the time it showed to him that it was possible for him, if he wanted to be a host of a TV show. If that was what he was inclined to do when he grew up. Whereas when I was younger, that wasn't a thing that you did. You were either a lawyer or accountant or a doctor or something like that. So I think what that photo demonstrated to me, and that moment demonstrated to me, was that representation is so important in any field, and whoever you look like or whoever you are, for that next generation. And I think that moment, showed to me the importance of doing something that does challenge you, which is what I did. But it also demonstrated to my son that yes, you could be on TV if that's what you really want to do when you want to grow up. So yeah, I really thought about that moment as one that was really important to my journey in the spotlight.
And well, not all of us, Tim, unlike yourself, I mentioned that Venn diagram and the very exclusive club that you must be a member of, but not all of us are going to get the opportunity to be a spokesperson for an organisation. Yet each of us still has the opportunity that you're talking about, that representation, to be brave, to take that leap, to step forward and do something different outside your comfort zone online. So we all have the opportunity to stand for something and to speak to something online. And that's the thing that I think is really important here. No, we're not all going to be on Sunrise. No, we're not all going to be with David and Sylvia, as you're saying, on TV. We're not all going to have our children think that we run TV shows, but we all have the opportunity to be visible online and to have an impact on those around us. So I think there is this theme that's coming through this conversation, Tim. I mean, you've talked about connection, and I think that is so important. You've talked about purpose and authenticity, and for you finding your confidence in your own space, and we've talked about self-limiting beliefs. And if I retrace those steps and say, well, if the thing that prevented you from speaking publicly for the very first time was still there, look at the journey that would have been lost in where you are today. And so do you have, maybe in trying to sum up your experiences, and again, not everyone's going to be that national spokesperson. That's not the message here. It's the fact that you did take that step out and you did give it a crack, and social media was part of that journey, certainly not the be all and end all, but part of that journey in a way for you to build a community, and a community that has extended well beyond your official roles and responsibilities from 2021 onwards, those first few years. As you look back now, and if you're talking to someone who's sitting there listening today going, yeah, but what value could I add? Or yeah, but what happens if people are critical of what I say or what I share online? How would you advise people in talking to those self-limiting beliefs? How would you advise them to take their first steps? And perhaps also, what do they stand to gain if they do?
Look, what they stand to gain is a good question. But the first thing is, I don't get an opportunity to speak to you, Roger, if I didn't, post my stuff on social media. But I think one thing that I would say is this, and what I've learnt over time, fear is the price of courage. It really is, and you can be comfortable and stay in your comfort zone, but until you kind of step outside that comfort zone, that's where the growth happens. And so for me, whether it's on social media and you're looking to post something on social media, if that resonates with your values and it stands for your values, then you should post it. And the way I looked at it was this: if it helps one person, that's success, right? If that helps one person change the trajectory of their life, then you've really added some value. And so I think you look at it from that rather than the vanity metrics. I think that's really important. And I think what I've learned from seeing other people on their own journeys, whether it's on LinkedIn or other platforms, I've seen so many people grow, and that has been such a delight from my perspective to see how they have grown, not only their confidence and their presence, but also the value that they're adding by posting on social media platforms like LinkedIn. And like I said before, if it helps one person, that to me is success. Like if you didn't post that, it would be a thought in your brain that hadn't been kind of articulated into paper or into written form. And so that wouldn't have been shared, to use your analogy before, Roger. So I think there's so much value in doing that, as long as it's aligned to the values that you have. And so for me, as I said before, I want to serve the next generation, to create a level playing field. So for me, it's about sharing some of the mistakes and the learnings that I've had to help people not make those same mistakes, right? And for them to kind of grow in their careers. But I'm not there to give them advice and say, this is how you should do it. I'm just there to kind of share some of my thoughts and my tidbits for them to kind of think about and cogitate over. And it's up to them to make the decisions that they have. But I just wanted to kind of let people know that, yeah, if I stayed in my comfort zone, which I could easily have done, right? There's nothing wrong with being in that comfort zone. As you said before, I wouldn't be here speaking to you and I wouldn't have done all the things that I've done. So I think for me, if you're looking to do something on socials, there's always risk with that. Yes, you can get criticised, and I've been criticised many times, and I'm sure you have as well when you post occasionally, when you post as well, Roger. So I think you've just got to. I also think it builds resilience as well when you're posting, because I think it shows that you've got a bit of a thick skin as well, right? And it's really important that when you are posting, it resonates with the values that you have.
And find that the message for me through that too is the thing that will tip people over is to find that purpose. Tap into what it is that drives you, what is it that motivates you, what is it that will set you on that path towards that ambition. Because when you do that, you're much more willing to, as you say, step over that fear and step into courage and take that opportunity. So I think that's really wise advice. And actually, to borrow a phrase from someone I know you know very well and a former guest on this podcast, Deb Jenkins at the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. And I still remember the line, and Deb said, if I don't feel it, I don't post it. And I think it's so simple, but there's so much wisdom in that, because this is you, this is your reputation, this is your integrity. And I think it's important to be, one, clear on what you are passionate and purposeful about, and then two, to stick to that. And it's not saying that your identity can't change, as you said. I'm not saying that at all, but make sure that you are being true to yourself and make sure that whatever you are talking about and whatever you are doing is true to you and where you are today. And when you find that purpose, it's incredibly powerful as your story shows. Tim, I really hope that people listening today have taken an enormous amount of encouragement for the fact that he was someone who didn't want to be seen publicly, to now where you are today. It is almost ludicrous. It is. Like, if I can play that back to you, and the fact that you've got your son sitting there going, do people know who you are? I love that. I love the innocence and the honesty of youth. So I hope people take a huge amount of encouragement away from that, and they remember these ideas of authenticity, of connection, and of having a crack and having that courage that you've talked about today. And if people do want to gain more inspiration and more kind of encouragement from you, what's the best way for them to find you or reach you online?
Yeah, look, I think the best place is through LinkedIn, and from there you can kind of book in some time with me through my newsletter, and that's probably the best way to get a hold of me, Roger. But no, I just want to say thanks so much for being on the show. It's a privilege, and it's great to talk to you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for making time, and thanks for being part of the Your Digital Reputation podcast.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening. If you've learned something from today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. For all show notes, head to propelgroup.com.au. Thanks again for listening.